I was a member of the union there. And so I got involved with Dave in the labor outreach group from its start. And I've reached out to the Ames Union and a number of other unions, thanks to Dave's organizing that he has done. And I would say that as a result of that, we have let a lot of unions know what we're doing, but we're still really searching for a union to endorse our proposal to Congress, and we'll keep trying. That's it.
Right, thanks. Yeah, Phil's been one of our action team members from the beginning. He's always been in our conference calls. It's been a big help. Sir?
My name's Tom. I work in the local area here and work through utility industry. And I now work with a number of different little nonprofits on projects to help do this transition. And then we run into interesting issues about jobs creation and labor and how can we work with groups to help them start the transition. So we're down at the hardware and grassroots level of doing things as opposed to the CCL policy level of changing the market and sending people to start acting.
And which organization do you work with doing this stuff?
Well, so one of them is Carbon Free Silicon Valley. It's a nonprofit that is going to be working to promote heat pump water heating and heat pump space heating using the clean electricity up and down the peninsula here. And then others are work with Stanford student projects on analyzing 100% wind, water, and solar portfolios for different cities.
Wow. Oh, thanks for coming.
Joe McDonough, member of IBEW inside Wireman, working with CCNO, a member of the Alameda chapter CCNO, Castro Valley, working to try to see if we can get IBEW on board with a carbon fee and dividend, ideology there. So that's the main goal at this point.
Yeah, John and I are working together on that, so that's really cool. Bruce?
Yeah, Bruce Hagan. I'm with the Santa Rosa chapter, and I've been very involved with the Business Climate Leaders Group, and it just occurred to me now that there's a lot of partnerships going on, as there should be, between labor and management to do one good thing or another, whether it's wages or working conditions or social impact stuff. And I'm thinking now, what organizations might be models for taking that the labor management cooperation forward on climate. So that's kind of the angle that I'm thinking of, other than I'm filming this now as well, and I like Dave.
Yeah, well, thanks for coming, Bruce. I wasn't entirely sure if you came to film or.
Well, I volunteered for this. I volunteered for the filming slot because I wanted to hear what's going on with the labor efforts as well. So.
Great.
And did everybody sign the sign-in sheet here?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Thanks.
We got all 6 of us.
Yeah, I think this is your second time with our labor outreach breakout at the region, so thanks for coming. So these are really short breakouts. What happened to my watch?
Is that it, the papers on top of in the corner?
Oh, you got a clock up on the wall.
On the cart.
He's looking for his one.
Yes,
Yeah, I know.
So I just want to keep track here. These 40-minute breakouts are super short. I thought that what I would do, because it's short, I'm not sure how much opportunity there will be for interaction. We'll try to allow some towards the end. I thought I would talk a little bit about the history of our labor outreach action team and the activities we've been doing. I thought we'd talk, Phil will help me as we go along, I think, what we've learned about unions and climate change and carbon fee and dividend. And then lastly, I'd like to show you some of the tools that our action team has come up with to help us in reaching out to unions. You know, we're called the Labor Outreach Action Team. I wanted to leave it broad because I didn't really want to cut out, you know, unorganized labor. But as a matter of fact, it's only organized labor that has political voice. And that's what, you know, Congress people are interested in. They make labor unions get out the vote for Congress people. They make contributions to Congress people. So really we've ended up focusing on unions, although we'll maybe mention the Tesla situation, which is non-union at the moment. Our action team at Community, which you can find with, you know, in the action team's directory, go to Connect on the top of the Community homepage, and it'll click on that. It gives you the drop down to all the different action teams, and we're listed there, and you can click on that and go to our site. We have 35 members, but only about a half a dozen of us are active. We would like to grow. We have support calls on fourth Mondays, 5 p.m. Pacific. And so some of the things that we've done the last couple of years, first we've had labor panel discussions at the June conferences in DC every year. Last year we had representatives from 3 different unions. That was one of our best in terms of union speakers. As Phil mentioned, I got an idea inspired by a Pasadena chapter member who was reaching out to business. Gave me the idea that, you know, so this is last year, and remember we had this pledge to pass carbon fee and dividend in 2017. Of course, that was before Trump was elected.
Right.
And so back in this time last year, hatched this plot to contact the legislative directors of. We decided to go with all unions with more than 100,000 members, which turns out to be about 3 dozen unions, which is most of them. I mean, there's only about 4 dozen, except there's lots of little fine ones broken off. But so that hit most of them. Contact their legislative directors and let them know about the carbon fee and dividend proposal. And we asked them, you know, what do you think of it, basically? The way we did it was I composed an email, sent it individually to each legislative director, and it was an identical email except for one little paragraph which kind of identified the industries that union works in. And then we had a team of a dozen CCL volunteers. Some of them were action team members, some of them were not, that we just recruited, who made follow-up calls after I sent out this initial email. Well, so we learned something. In this process, we didn't get very much response, except from, you know, unions that we already knew were kind of interested in climate change. But in the process, I think we made a good impression. We let them know we exist. We let them know this proposal is out there. I mean, one reason for lack of response, I think, was simply that, you know, it's not even an introduced bill yet. You know, if it were, I think it would have been a different story. But as it turned out, that's what helped make our panel discussion the best last June, because what I did when I wanted to recruit panelists, I went back to the legislative directors, who were the only people that I knew there. I picked out certain unions I was interested in, and I invited, you know, I'd like to invite you or a colleague to come and participate in our panel. Bingo. That's much easier to, you know, ask people, to come and talk about what's on their mind. You know, so that was interesting. And in terms of our action, you know, chapters are doing action plans for when a bill is introduced. And also action teams are supposed to come up with action plans. Well, our action plan is that our team of follow-up volunteers is still online and waiting. When a bill is introduced, I'll probably initially contact the legislative directors again, and then our team will make follow-up calls. And I think that's going to be pretty helpful when a bill is introduced, because they already know a little bit about us. So there's that aspect. I was able to meet after the November conference that we just had, partly as a result of this contact with legislative directors. I was able to meet with 3 unions in DC, the Steelworkers, Assistant Legislative Director, who we had been in contact with, also with AFSCME, that's the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. It's a union for all government employees except federal, basically, who had been on our panel. I met with that guy. And then I met with my own union. By the way, my own background, one reason I decided to do this is that I was a letter carrier in the Postal Service. And so I belonged to that union as a retiree as well. And so I met with the Safety and Health Officer for letter carriers. And just for your interest, when I first called this guy, since it's my own union, I didn't go to the legislative director. I went to one of the officers, and Safety and Health seemed like the right one. And as soon as I brought this up, you know, global warming, he says, you know, I mean, for the last few years, letter carriers have been having problems with heat waves, you know, out on their routes. And so, anyway, the upshot of those 3 meetings, well, maybe I'll get to that a little later when we discuss the union reactions to things. But that was pretty cool. I stayed after the conference and in the hope I could get some meetings, and I actually did. And then finally, of course, local outreach. We wanted to contact national in case the bill was introduced, but really we need to, you know, approach local union locals around where around where our chapters are, and so we're doing some of that. And we've gotten a few endorsements, which I'll show you in the handout. So, what have we learned about unions in the process since we've been doing this, unions and climate change? Well, unions are kind of all over the map when it comes to the climate change issue. Not too different from the rest of the public, I guess, you know, in that regard. Climate change is not really a priority for, I think I would say most unions. They really have their hands full, you know, representing members. That's a full-time job, particularly now with the Trump administration. Generally, I don't think the federal government has been all that union-friendly since, well, I don't know, maybe Kennedy and Johnson, pretty much, but even, you know, going back to Roosevelt, I don't think Obama was super supportive, especially, and of course the Republican administrations usually are not, you know, supportive. So that's part of the issue. But it is a priority for some unions. For example, the IBEW, speaking of union management sort of cooperation, I just learned that, the IBEW, and that's the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, their East Bay local, along with, the Contractors Association, got together and they funded this Zero Net Energy Center in, San Leandro, which is really quite a deal. You can search for them online, and there's a gallery of photos. It's a training center for IBEW members, to learn the technologies, of clean energy technologies, and, get trained to work in that area. It's quite impressive.
It's also open up to the public too. There's a lot of training that's there because the state requires electricians to be certified. And under the state rules, facilities like that have to be open to the public so that it gives the equal opportunity to people that are not union to actually get the training. Now, they have to pay the premium, to take a class, whereas if you're a union member, then it's all part of the educational program that's taken out of your dues on a monthly basis.
Yeah, well, that makes perfect sense. And of course, one of the, roles of unions is to train their members and increase their skills, So I was pretty impressed to find out about that. The AFT, the American Federation of Teachers, has passed a couple of different resolutions. About a year ago, they passed a national resolution that, among other things, it calls for a fee on carbon pollution. Okay. The AFSCME, again, the American Federation of State, County, Municipal Employees, nationally, they passed in 2014 a shareholder activism resolution, which was mainly about fossil fuel companies need to be thinking about the impact that they're having, on global warming and stuff. Well, 2 years later at their conference, they jacked it up a level and went to a resolution calling for divesting from fossil fuel investments. And so when I met with the AFSCME guy last November, I kind of put it to him, well, maybe your next step ought to be to advocate for some legislation. And so he said he would run our carbon fee and dividend up the flagpole and see what happens. I need to follow it up once, but it was right after Thanksgiving. I need to, contact him again. Hard to say just what's going to happen there. But so speaking of unions and carbon fee and dividend, okay. They kind of break down into two groups, you might say. Groups that are unions whose members' jobs will not be especially affected probably, by the transition to a low carbon economy, such as teachers, such as AFSCME, the government unions, and so forth. They're likely to be more open to the 100% dividend. I might back up just 1 second to say that the importance, I think, for us to reach out to labor is that they are an important constituent of the Democratic Party, right? Not the Republicans. And Democratic members of Congress, they're getting some contributions from labor, they're getting some get out the vote from labor, and they'd like to know which unions support carbon fee and dividend. So that's an important reason for us to be doing this. Now, those unions that are likely to have some job loss going to a low carbon economy, they may want to see some revenue being used for transition assistance, from employees. So for example, I met with AFSCME, as I said, in DC, that they were ready to their guy liked carbon fee and dividend, he was going to run up the flagpole. The steel workers rep, however, steelworkers work in refineries, among other things. They're a highly diversified union, but they would be looking at some job losses, and so their person said, well, we're good with the fee, we're good with the border adjustment, but when it comes to the revenue, we would like to see some revenue used for transition assistance for employees that will lose their jobs. And secondly, we'd like some for targeted investments. Now, I made a little mistake, maybe we ran out of time, but I didn't get exactly what that was about. Generally, targeted investments, though, are to help create, more jobs. We know that from the Rimmer report, carbon fee and dividend will create some new jobs, but it's a passive price signal, right? Some Democrats, some union folks would like to see some targeted to, create employment in specific areas. And so that's what the steelworkers person wanted. And so, it made sense, from their point of view. So the other thing that we've learned about unions and climate change is, it's just not easy to get what we'd like to do, kind of like we do with presenters and endorsers and business climate leaders and everything else. We'd like to get a sit down, with people to talk about carbon fee and dividend. Well, it's not very easy to get that with unions. Now, John is an IBEW member, and we're working on it, and he's a high-level, experienced, well-known IBEW member, and so based on that, we're working on a sit-down with IBEW. But for if you're not a union member at all, or maybe not a member of that particular union, it's not so easy. Although I don't want to discourage those of you who are not union members at all from giving it a shot, and I'll have some tips. I think we haven't been able to do enough of this to decide for sure, does it make a big difference if you're a union member to be able to, do labor outreach, or can just a regular CCL volunteer with no union background and get this to happen. So that's still an open question. If you have some union background, you have a sense of how unions work, how they think, it can be helpful in doing this. So because we have found it's not so easy to get meetings like this, we have adopted kind of a different approach, which is to as we approach unions, ask them where they're coming from on climate change. Don't go in there to start, we have a proposal for Congress, we'd like to talk to you about it. No, just we're a lobbying group. If you have a union association, fine. And we're lobbying Congress on climate change. We're wondering how your union sees the climate change issue, how it might impact your members. Could we talk or present for whatever? So at this point, I'd like to pass out the little handouts I have. Let's see, we just got 6. So, Phil, you're pretty knowledgeable, so let me skip you over.
Sure, that's
and
fine.
Pass out the other 5. You'll know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Hey, while you're doing that, let
Yeah.
me mention a couple things that we learned as part of the process that Dave just described. Dave mentioned that some of the unions would like to see, if a carbon tax passes, that some of the revenue collected would go to transition assistance, helping find new jobs, new careers for people whose jobs are likely to be eliminated as fossil fuels phase out. And we actually found a scholarly research study that estimated the cost of such transition assistance. And we were very pleased to see that that cost would be a very small fraction of what would be collected in a carbon fee such as CCL is proposing now. So that's the first thing. The other thing is some of the unions who would be most favorable to action on climate, such as healthcare workers unions and teachers unions and a couple others, they are also the ones that feel most threatened by what the Trump administration has been doing over the past year. And therefore, it was really hard to get the attention of those unions to climate change because they were more worried about saving their jobs under the Trump administration.
Right.
I just actually heard from, what's her name? Diane Russell, who's,
My wife.
you know her? Yeah.
I
Yeah.
do.
Well, she made the point that now that it looks like the steam has been taken out of the repeal of the Affordable Care Act, at least for the moment, that they might have a little bit more capacity to think about other
Yes.
other issues. And you know, there's the same thing in the clean energy industry that I'm working with, is that they've had the now they know what's going to happen with their investment tax credit for solar and wind, and they're going to have some other major trade case decided, and it's the timing that's like the legislative people now have the ability to think about other things because they're not completely occupied. That's where we can slip in and have those meetings.
Yep. Good points.
One thing,
John.
can I interject there, is, the thing is with labor, especially organized labor, I see issues dealing mainly with over the last 30 to even 40 years, the percentage of organized labor employed personnel has dropped substantially.
Yep.
And so the unions basically today are kind of like on a desperate mode to at least retain what they have percentage-wise, and they're making some efforts to, you know, get out, organize, and to get the populations back up. And that's why, like he was just saying earlier, in regards that the fee and dividend is a great idea, but they might want to think of maybe just a fraction of that to be set aside, not specifically only for unions, but for workers in general that may be displaced, that there is some kind of funding available for retraining that way, and that might even include some offset to living expenses during the time of that transition. So maybe that might end up coming down the pike instead of just a straight across the board fee and dividend, where the money is, the carbon tax is there, and then it's given out to each individual Social Security card owner, which, you know, is a great idea. But again, going back to the labor, the organized labor system, especially in my knowledge of the IBEW actually has its tentacles in a lot of industries. I mean, you'd be surprised what they're in that you wouldn't even think they're in. And so because of that, you know, is going to be a big hurdle to try to get them on board. But I know there's a way, and it's just the way how we present it, and that would be presented in a way that that actually will work, you know, that will actually come down the pipe.
I'm thinking, because I used to be in the energy, well, I still am sort of in the energy sector, but I worked for PG&E for 2 decades and with a clean energy company. And the whole thing about decarbonization is, to a large degree, electrification of the economy. So electric vehicles and a lot of other things that used to be powered directly by fossil fuels would be powered by electricity or hydrogen or batteries that generated from clean sources. And I'm just wondering to what extent anybody has studied the potential of that transition to sustain and even expand the role of electrical workers who have to do all this stuff. And, there's windmills. They talk about DC high voltage transmission lines to get wind from wind-rich areas to urban areas and all that. I don't know of any such study, and I think Remy touched on that a bit when it talked, it showed manufacturing and it showed construction, which could be the zero net energy homes, or it could be, high voltage transmission lines.
Well, I know for a fact that, in regards to those alternative energy as well as electric vehicles, has generated quite a few jobs as to date. Out of that, a percentage has been, union workers.
Mm-hmm.
The majority of them so far, depends on what state you're in, but, has also been done a lot by non-union.
Yeah.
Especially, you have like, right to work states.
Yeah.
Where, there's, issues dealing with that, and that's where there's a big problem with unions trying to infiltrate that scenario.
Mm-hmm.
But then the other thing is, that deals with, the aspects of the non-union, as opposed, or not opposed to, but also, working with jobs that are union as well as non-union. For the states as well as, contracts that, that have the support of the Davis-Bacon Act, which means that, union contractors that bid on those jobs are bidding against non-union contractors, but it's an even playing field. And the reason is because under the Davis-Bacon Act, everybody would be paid. If you hire a union guy at the prevailing rate that the union rate would be,
Mm-hmm.
the non-union personnel would get the same rate
Mm-hmm.
when they get the contract.
Yeah.
And that's a win-win for sometimes the union, but the bottom line is also for the workers.
Sure.
Would be getting a premium than they would normally not get. But then when you get into other areas where it may not be a federal contract or even a state contract, the Davis-Bacon isn't there.
Yeah.
And so the unions usually lose out on those. And so you get corporations coming in, they buy up or they get leases on large land tracts, and they put up windmills, and, all the way from the time that it leaves the factory, where it was a non-union factory, to transporting it, to the erection, as well as the installation and the online, is all non-union. And
Mhm.
so that's where the unions are trying to, get back in there to
Yeah.
say, well, look, we can do all that there too, and everybody's union all the way, and by having the union wages, everybody has a better income, better benefits, and better, for the working class all
Yeah,
the way. So
yeah.
that's what they're trying to do, but it's a very hard,
Yeah.
process.
Yeah, and that almost exists independent of, at least the way the current policies are, of where the energy is coming from and what the projects are,
Exactly,
whether it's union or non.
right, exactly.
Yeah, we just have a couple of minutes left, so I'd like to go through the handout quickly, which just shows you some of the resources we have available on our community site that can help you do labor outreach. Just to follow up quickly on John's point, something to keep in mind when, some unions, say, coal miners, for example, or refinery workers, who are, union members making good pay, good benefits, good retirement, who are gonna lose their jobs, yes, carbon fee and dividend creates jobs in the economy, and some will be in renewable energy, but are these union jobs? You see,
Mhm.
that's the kicker.
Mhm.
Just like ending up in McDonald's, well, solar installation, residential solar rooftop installation, that's not union. So there's no comparison. So in any event, the first one simply shows carbon fee and dividend endorsements that we have from some unions already. The biggest one we have is the California Nurses Association. But then the others are some small locals. As you can see, our endorsements are pretty thin right now. So next page,
What is LL and PP and plus and?
LL means a leader's letter,
Okay.
a CCL leader's letter. PP means a public position. 4 stars, it means calls for carbon fee and dividend. That's why I highlighted the 4 stars and the LLs. Okay? 3 stars is our leader's letter for, 2 stars is the climate action leader's letter. 3 stars is they call for a carbon fee or a tax. Anyway, so going over next, we have the suggestions for contacting local unions. I guess it's a little self-explanatory if you take a look at it. First is how to identify some unions for outreach, how to actually make contact, and then our contact message, which I touched on just a little bit. We avoid going in there talking about carbon fee and dividend. We go in there with the approach of, we're working on climate change. What are you all thinking about it, and try to listen and open a conversation that way. Keeping going, there's this chart here. It's a little bit of a custom. Now, this comes from the REMRE report, actually. If you have ever opened the full 100-page plus REMRE report, on page 17, I think, is the first version of the chart, which is the national, and that's what's copied here. Now, but what's in REMI is only the actual job numbers. What we got from REMI separately was translating those numbers as a percentage of employment nowadays, right now. And that's a little more meaningful for the unions. And as you can see, it gives a different impression. Let's take construction, gaining 245,000 jobs in 20 years sounds like a lot. That's actually only 1.36% more than now. Anyway, something interesting to notice, look in the percent change 20 years column, the third one down. That is the biggest percentage job loss, which is in oil and gas extraction. But look at it this way, in 20 years, 23%, that's just a little over 1% per year. That's really kind of slow. When you look at it this way, I don't think we can really call REMI a CF&D a jobs bill. We talk about 2.8 million jobs in 20 years. That's only about 1% of the total employment. So there's not a huge impact on jobs, really one way or the other, except that, oil and gas extraction does, hurt a little bit. And as Phil mentioned, we saw this study that showed that, well, just real quickly, we've been approved by staff to talk with unions in this manner. Yes, we're proposing 100% revenue neutral, 100% dividends, but a guy named Walt Minnick, a former congressman who's been now hanging out in DC, hanging out with us, he has said, and I checked this out with Mark and Danny, no argument, I think what we really want mostly is good bipartisan support. We don't want revenue neutrality per se, but we know that that's, gets the conservative support. So, this guy Walt, who has hung out with actually you guys,
Yeah.
that's where I met him, he says, I think we can get pretty good bipartisan support if 10% of the revenue were set aside for whatever, some special programs. Obvious things like transition assistance for fossil fuel workers, some targeted investments, say. And, there's so much revenue. The first year alone, 10% would be $8 billion. Now, a woman at the Berkeley, UC Labor Center thought, well, the 600 million only that for transition that we saw in the Perry report, she thought it was more like 3 billion, or million, whatever, a bigger number, but it's still within what our revenue is. So that's encouraging information. That's
Then there's the infrastructure initiative, or whatever you want to call it. That's one of the big things that the Republicans are trying to accomplish before the end of this year. And what does that look like, and how is it going to be funded, and what sort of infrastructure are we talking about? Because it could very well be clean energy infrastructure. It could be job intensive from union or union scale labor, depending on the politics of it all. So that's just another thing to be thinking about, because that will get a lot of congressional attention this year.
The very last thing in here is several pages. I just printed the whole damn thing out. It's something that we put together using information from the Labor Network for Sustainability, which is an organization I'd like you to know about. They are really, I'm understanding their mission more now, since we've done more labor outreach. They are really working with union members to get them interested in climate change, so they can get their leaders interested in climate change. So they're a pretty interesting group.
What's their name again?
Labor Network for Sustainability. In any event, what they did a couple of years ago was they went through, not all unions are here, but many of the important ones are. They did a labor landscape analysis, which was to find out, what are unions' thoughts about environment or climate change. And so this is also on our community site, and it can help you to know something about unions that you might want to reach out to, and how receptive they might be to an environmental message. The very last thing I would like you to know about is, since we decided a better approach, since we can't get meetings hardly, is to do a listening approach. Our chapter, the Alameda chapter, and the Contra Costa chapter are working together to organize a labor and climate change panel discussion for sometime in March, we hope. And we'll have a woman from the Berkeley Labor Center and 3 or 4 union reps there. So you'll all get a notice about it and an invitation, and we're hoping that a number of union members will also come, because we'll have a social hour afterwards, and we'll just be able to get acquainted. So that's our latest local plan. Any quick questions before we get out of here?
Your source in Pasadena?
Oh, that was, can't think of his name right now. He published a paper. John, maybe, somebody? Do you know someone there?
I do, I know everyone there, I just moved from Pasadena.
Sorry, his name escapes me right now. Anyway, thank you so much for coming. I hope that you might consider joining our action team. We're building up our resources and our experience, and the more members that we have, the more outreach we can do.